This is a News Channel 15 special report.
Good morning. I'm WPDE Sports Director Rich Crampanis. Coastal Carolina has found its second head football coach in the program's history. On December 9th, David Bennett was dismissed as the Chanticleer's head coach. It is a sudden and shocking move, and now Coastal Carolina's administration has made an equally shocking move, going off the grid to say the least, to hire its next head coach. Joe Moglia is a 61-year-old former CEO of TD Ameritrade who has been at one time valued anywhere between $100 million. Sports Illustrated call him a billionaire. He spent one season in the UFL, and now here's David DeCenzo set to introduce Joe Moglia as the Chanticleer's head football coach.
Over 4 years ago, I introduced at my inaugural theme, the dawning of a new tomorrow. The dawning of a new tomorrow set the stage for the new direction of Coastal Carolina University. Building upon a strong foundation that had been put in place, we set our sights on new horizons. Today marks another new day as we continue our quest. As we turn our page to Chapter 2 of Coastal Carolina football, we build on the strong foundation that has been set, and we aggressively move into uncharted areas. As Hall of Fame coach George Allen said, the future is now. Thank all of you for coming. It is my pleasure to introduce the athletic director who will introduce the new coach of the Coastal Carolina University Chanticleers football team. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We are very excited today as we begin a new chapter in the history of Coastal Carolina football. The head football coach of a Division I program, first and foremost, has to be a strong leader and possess a skill set comparable to those of a major company's CEO. They must be able to take a group of people from different backgrounds, unite them, energize them, and create a belief and a common mission among them. A leader must be able to instill confidence, discipline, and a relentless competitive spirit within their organization. They also must be able to make tough decisions under pressure, stick with those decisions, and accept the consequences. I assure you, we have found each of these leadership characteristics in our new football coach. Joe Moglia's life story and rise to stardom is one that will captivate any audience. I hope each of you will have a chance to get to know him, his story, and his passion for the game of football and for the student athlete. His life story includes a 20-year coaching career that began at the age of 22 and included successful stops early in his career at both Lafayette College and Dartmouth College. In 2008, as then the CEO of TD Ameritrade, he was approached by Yale University regarding his interest in becoming their head football coach. While he did not pursue this opportunity at Yale, he came to the conclusion that the passion to coach football still burned deep inside. Later that same year, he made the decision to step away from his role as CEO at TD Ameritrade to join the Nebraska football staff as an executive consultant to the head coach. He began to reacclimate himself to football under the guidance of head coach Bo Pelini, the Nebraska staff, and coaching legend Dr. Tom Osborne. During his tenure at Nebraska, Nebraska recorded a 20-8 record, played in 2 Big 12 championship games, and 2 postseason bowl games. The Nebraska players showed Coach Moglia the ultimate respect by voting him as the recipient of the Admiral's Trophy for Leadership and Service during the 2010 Holiday Bowl. In a conversation I had last week with Coach Osborne, he described Joe as being the most organized and detail-oriented person that he has ever been around and a true student of the game of football. Longtime NFL defensive coordinator Tom Olivadotti described him as possessing the same skill set of many of the NFL coaches he has worked under, including the great Don Shula. Last year, these characteristics led him to being named as the head coach and president of the UFL's Omaha Nighthawks. Joe will tell you at this point in his life he could be doing anything, but he wants to fulfill his life's passion to be a college football head coach. He will also tell you he's not going to pursue an endeavor which he cannot be a success at, and history has proved this to indeed be the case. Coach Moglia, it is a privilege and an honor today to give you a game ball on behalf of Coastal Carolina University. Let this ball symbolize the official handoff of the Coastal Carolina University football program to your leadership and guidance as our head coach. It is now my pleasure to introduce to each of you the new head coach of the Coastal Carolina Chanticleer football team, Coach Joe Moglia. Thank you.
Doctor, thank you very much. Hunter, thank you very much. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here now, and I look forward to being able to get to know all of you a little bit better over time. Forgive me, I'm going to put this down. And let me explain kind of what I'd like to be able to do, if I may. And that's, I don't have any prepared notes, but I do want to share with you some of the stuff that you would not see in reading my resume. I'd like to talk a little bit about my thoughts as far as the future of Coastal Carolina football goes, and then I'd like the opportunity to open it up for questions. Now, guys, I apologize right up front, and I know we're always on a time schedule, but what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to answer every question you have. I don't care if I'm here till 5 o'clock tonight. If you have questions, I'm going to do everything I can to answer those questions. So that's the way we'll handle this, and that's the way we'll handle most things kind of going forward. Okay, so with that, allow me to begin. And what the part of this that I'd like to share is a little bit more of my personal background. And some of this part, some of the stories I've really only been sharing over the span of the last couple of years or so. I was born and raised in the Dyckman Street section of Manhattan. This is a gang area. In fact, you all know Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Certainly you know who he was. Well, when he grew up, his name was Lou Alcindor. He wound up going to UCLA. Oftentimes when he's been asked about what are the things that have really made you who you are in your life, he says basically there are two things. And he always says John Wooden, his coach at UCLA, and he says, and because of the tough neighborhood that I grew up in. He grew up 4 blocks from me. And my father was born in Italy. He moved to this country when he was 11. If any of you have ever seen the movie The Bronx Tale with Robert De Niro, that's the Italian section of the Bronx. That's where my dad actually grew up. And he grew up, it's 4535 Park Avenue. But this is 4535 Park Avenue in the Bronx that overlooks the railroad tracks. My dad never finished 8th grade. He sold bananas and apples in the Bronx and at a fruit stand, a fruit store his entire life. He worked 13 hours a day, 6 days a week from the time he was a kid. He served our country in the war until he retired when he was 80. Now, he meets my mom at the end of World War II in Ireland. My mom was born and raised in Ireland. She comes to this country to marry my dad. And I thought I'd share a little story along that line with you. They dated for a little while. He was back home for a year or two. He writes my mom and asks her to come to this country and marry him. My wife, his future wife, my mom, Frances Bridget McLarnon, takes this letter from Giovanni Albino Moglia and brings it to her parents. They read the letter. They say, Mom, Dad, what do you think? And they say, sit down, Frances. There are 3 things. First, this guy's Italian. I didn't think that they thought that was a good thing. Secondly, though, he does own his own business. That's good. Yeah, he had a fruit store in the Bronx. And thirdly, though, did you check the return address on this envelope? It's Park Avenue. You can't let this guy get away. So she winds up moving to 4535 Park Avenue in the Bronx, initially to be with my dad. And while she thought she was moving in with my dad, it turns out it was my dad, his mom, 3 brothers, and a sister. And my grandma never learned how to speak English, so everybody would speak Italian in the house. Now, this woman had never been out of Ireland, and she would look at her view of the railroad tracks. And she was there about a month, and she wrote home to her parents, Mom, Dad, I have no idea why the Americans make such a big deal about this Park Avenue. Now, my mom never finished high school. So when they started to have a family, they moved to this Dyckman Street section of Manhattan where I wound up growing up. I was the oldest of the 5. There were 7 of us that lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. two of my very, very best friends in grammar school got killed in high school, one of a drug overdose, one got killed trying to rob a liquor store. I've never done drugs, but there's a decent chance at that point in my life that I might have been with the guy robbing the liquor store. But the reason why I wasn't was because I was playing football at high school. Now, I wound up going to Fordham Prep, which is an all-boys Catholic school in the Bronx. Fordham Prep and Fordham University are on the same campus in the Bronx. And I played football and baseball there. When I wasn't doing that, I was working at my father's fruit store, and my goal was ultimately to play both of those sports in college. And I wasn't good enough to play at a major college, but I was good enough to be able to play either sport at the FCS level. And the story gets a little bit more complicated, but what winds up happening is I become a father and I wind up getting married. Now, my father's advice to me is this is a good opportunity to quit school and work full-time in the fruit store. I really felt I needed to go to college. But there was no money for me to go to college. I was going to have to give up athletics, which I did, and I was going to have to figure out a way to support my wife, my child, and put myself through school. So I wound up going to Fordham. And I drove a yellow cab in New York City. I drove a truck for the post office. I worked at my dad's store. And it wasn't the easiest time that a typical college student ever had. And I realized the one thing that I had that I always had in my life that was missing was sports. So because the prep and the university were on the same campus, I went back to the prep and asked them if they'd give me a coaching job. But they absolutely had to be a paid coaching job because I needed the money. They gave me that. So my last 3 years in college, I coached high school football during the season. In the off season, I worked at my dad's store. I majored in economics, and I thought one day I'd be an investment banker on Wall Street. But by the time I got to be a senior, what I found what I found that I was most passionate about was coaching the kids that I was coaching, and that if I could get my own head high school football program, I'd love the opportunity to actually really realize a career in coaching. So I probably applied to 100 schools, and at 22, I had one head high school job offer, and at 22, I became, at the time, the youngest high school football coach in the history of the state of Delaware. I wind up coaching football for 16 years. I'm proud of what we were able to do during that time period. We turned 2 high school programs around. We set some national records and school records at Lafayette. I was a defensive coordinator at Dartmouth for 3 years. We won 2 Ivy League championships. I had written a book on football. I had authored 11 articles coaching in national coaching journals. And one day I absolutely believed that I was going to be a head coach at a place like the University of South Carolina or at Notre Dame or Nebraska, a major college head coach. And my first year at Dartmouth, that same girl that I married when I was 19, we now have 4 children. And part of this is the pressures of coaching. Part of this is the fact that we got married young. We were going through a divorce. And I didn't have, this started October, my first year at Dartmouth. And I didn't have enough money to be able to live independently and support my wife and 4 children. So I got permission to move into a storage room above the football offices at Dartmouth. Now, this is Hanover, New Hampshire. It gets a lot colder in Hanover, New Hampshire than it does in Myrtle Beach or Conway, South Carolina. And the problem was this room, the storage room, had no heat. So I could actually see my breath in the wintertime. I wound up living in that loft for 2 years. In January '84, some of you may remember this, most of you may not, I understand that, but the University of Miami upsets Nebraska, it's a coincidence, it's Nebraska, for the national championship. The coach at Miami at the time was Howard Schnellenberger. His defensive coordinator was Tom Olivadotti. The head coach at Nebraska was Dr. Tom Osborne. They wound up having an opening on their staff. They offered me an opportunity to go down there, and ultimately I would succeed Tom as the defensive coordinator. Now, for me, as the defensive coordinator at Dartmouth, we were 1AA back then, FCS today, to go from the defensive coordinator at Dartmouth to the defensive coordinator at the national championship team, that's a pretty significant honor, and it's a nice step to get to that next big head coaching job. But the reality for me was that my children were going to live in New Hampshire with their mom. Coral Gables is 1,000 miles away from them. The life of a football coach is pretty intense in season. I didn't have enough money. Coaches really didn't make much money back then. I wouldn't have been able to fly him back and forth. I wouldn't have been able to see him. And the conclusion I reached is I really didn't believe I could do the job that I needed to do as a coach if I couldn't live up to my responsibility as a father. So I wound up turning down that job, and I wound up coming to the conclusion that I absolutely had to get out of coaching, because at some point I knew I was going to leave Dartmouth anyway. And I didn't see that situation necessarily getting better in terms of the ability to be able to take care of my family. So the other thing that I always cared about and I enjoyed and I thought I would be good at was the business world. So I was interested in the institutional side of Wall Street, and while I was still at Dartmouth and I was recruiting, I did everything I could to try to get different interviews on Wall Street, and eventually Merrill Lynch winds up giving me a job, and they put me in the MBA training program. Now, there were 26 of us in the MBA training program at Merrill Lynch. There were 25 MBAs from Harvard and Stanford, et cetera, and there's one football coach. And everybody at Merrill Lynch is betting this guy is never, ever going to make it here. But the reality was, while it was kind of a tough beginning, the reality was everything turned out pretty well. And a few years later, those MBAs were working for me. And I couldn't be prouder of the run we had at Merrill while I was there. So I was there 17 years. For those of you that recall this, the 90s, we had the dot-com era in this country. And anything that said dot-com, anything that was internet-related, anything that had anything to do with technology was soaring as far as the stock market goes or the financial world goes. But then the bubble was a bubble, and that bubble burst. And from the beginning of last decade, we were in a pretty difficult recession for 3 years, as difficult as we've seen in this country for 30 years, but not as difficult, by the way, as the recession we're in today. And firms, technology firms and online brokerage firms were struggling, and TD Ameritrade was one of those firms. It was Ameritrade at the time. So they did a national search. They offered me the job to go there as CEO. Now, I remarried in 1995. And now I've got 2 stepsons. So the 4 older kids are still growing up in New Hampshire. But now I've got my new family, and we make a decision that we're going to move from New York City to Omaha, Nebraska to take the Ameritrade job. We get there, and the reality was they wouldn't have brought somebody like me in if they weren't having some difficulty. And there was a lot of pressure. And from a firm that almost wound up going out of business, I'm incredibly proud of what we accomplished there. So now 2008 happens. Now I'm going to just adjust Hunter's story a little bit. I need to be able to do that because it's my story anyway. Do you agree? Okay. So in 2008, literally when we were having financial Armageddon in this country. Now, it was very, very serious back then. And in fact, the entire world was challenging the stability of the financial system of the United States. Ameritrade, we had our 6th record year in a row. And during the last 5 years, we had literally outperformed virtually every financial service firm in the world. And we got it right. Now, I'll always take a little luck, but the reality is we made a lot of good decisions, and we really did get it right. And I thought the responsibility of any leader is always to think about the future and to think about what the succession plan is supposed to be. And I thought it was the time to pull the trigger on my own succession. So we did that. So we announced that summer that I would be stepping down at the end of fiscal 2008, which was literally the end of September. We announced who our new CEO was going to be. The board asked me if I would stay and take on the role as chairman. I said I'd be incredibly honored to do that. And when we made that announcement, I got a tremendous amount of, frankly, interest from some of the largest financial service firms in the world and Wall Street in general. I had some interest from the media about potential talk about maybe I'd want to do my own television show. When I was at Ameritrade, one of the things that I felt we needed was an aspirational mission, something to really get our troops together, something that they could really care about, something that they could become passionate about. And for us, that mission was to bring financial literacy to every family in this country. And we wanted to be able to do that through education and marketing. So I thought, to kind of set an example of that, I wrote a book on investing to demonstrate to the typical family that, you know what, this is not that complicated. And frankly, Wall Street makes it a little bit more difficult than what it needs to be. So I'm coincidentally then the only guy in the world that's actually written books that have been published on both football and investing. I've been asked to write a book on leadership. All those things are starting to come to place. And then what happened, there was a group of alumni associated with Yale that contacted me and said there was a chance at the end of the 2008 season that their job might be open, would I be interested? And literally, I remember taking the phone and kind of looking at it like this and said, you guys understand, I haven't coached for 20 years. And they said, we know that, but we've spent a lot of time looking at the skill sets that are really, truly required of a successful head college coach. We believe you've got those. Why don't you think about it? So over the span of the next 5 months, that's literally all I did. And I found I didn't lose 1 second of sleep in any of the business opportunities, the media opportunities, the speaking opportunities, but I couldn't get the football thing out of my head. And I had 5 legal pads by Thanksgiving filled out, why I shouldn't be doing this, but mostly what are the skill sets? Do I really have those skill sets? Am I passionate about this? Can I really do this? Can I get this done? And the decision, and the guy that befriended me through this was Tom Osborne at Nebraska. And the decision that I ultimately made was, at this point in my life when there are a lot of things that I can do, what is the thing that I think I really believe I would be best at? What is the career path that I believe I will have the greatest impact at? And what is the career path that will give me the greatest satisfaction? And without a doubt in my mind, it was going back to football. And going back to coaching at the college level and being a head coach. There is literally nothing I believe that can give somebody greater satisfaction than having a positive impact on others. And for me, nothing that matters more than playing a role in helping an 18 to 22-year-old person really become a man. And to do that through football in a college environment, I just don't think it gets any better than that. So Tom was good enough to introduce me to Bo Pelini. I spent many hours with him. Bo offered me the opportunity to join their staff, and my title was I was executive advisor for football. Now, what does that really mean? Now, remember, there were a lot of NCAA rules in terms of what you're actually allowed to do as a coach and what you're not allowed to do, and we certainly, just as we do here, we certainly followed all those in Nebraska.
WPDE Sports Director Rich Krampanis, Joe Moglia, perhaps the longest introduction of an opening statement as a head college football coach. I want to boil down his story, much shorter than we've just heard for the past 20 minutes. In 1983, Joe Moglia was a defensive coordinator at Dartmouth College, decided to enter the corporate world. He then went into New York and Merrill Lynch, then worked his way to Ameritrade in Omaha, Nebraska. He orchestrated a $2.9 billion merger between TD Waterhouse and Ameritrade. That is his most impressive stat. He left the corporate world following 2008, was a volunteer assistant at Nebraska under Bo Pelini. He got a head coaching job in 2011 in the UFL. That's an outdoor professional league for the Omaha Riverhawks. His career record as a head coach is 1-4. He replaces David Bennett. If you log on to CarolinaLive.com right now to continue to watch that press conference, we have more information on Joe Moglia on CarolinaLive.com, and we'll have full coverage of Coastal's second football coach coming up on News Channel 15 at 6. I'm WPDE Sports Director Rich Krampanis. We now return you to regular programming.
This has been a News Channel 15 special report.